Hello, and today I'd like to talk about another store. Well, I mean, a store I think we all know about, most people, and that would be Toys R Us. And now, Toys R Us, last year they made a lot of news because they went out of business. Well, at least in America, anyway. Actually, here in Japan, where I live now, they're actually still around because they're a separate company. I think in some other countries too, they're still around, but in America, they're definitely gone where they started, of course. But today I want to talk about my memories of classic Toys R Us. When I mean classic, I mean like the style of Toys R Us from like the 80s, and they were around in the 90s too, until maybe like the late 90s. But I'll go into my personal memories of the Toys R Us near where I lived that had the classic look, like the 80s, 90s, well, kind of 80s, but it was prevalent in the 90s too, more so early 90s, but I'll get into that later. But yeah, early Toys R Us was different, like 80s, 90s, maybe in the 70s too. I don't know, but early Toys R Us was different. Like when you walked in the place, it was huge. Like the ones that were of recent times, maybe the last 20 years, that's when they changed their look. Like they had less stock. And I mean, and then there was like when you went into Toys R Us back in the day, like the place was huge, and the aisles were so long, and it felt like, and as a kid, it felt like huge, like you were like in a maze, and it felt like a maze of toys, which was awesome at the time. I mean, there were toys everywhere. Like the shelves were like really high too. Some of them with like board games and stuffed animals and whatever, like action figure aisle. Like there was so much stock, and it was so amazing back then, seeing how big it was, and just like, and then with the video games, like you had at that time, you had to get like a ticket for anything video game related, and like a system or a game, and you take the ticket and you give it to the cashier, I believe, and they'd go. There was this room, and you could see it. It was like a separate room, at least the one I went to back in the day, and it was a room and it had all the video game stuff in there and systems and anything related to games, and they'd go back there and get it for you, and then you pay for it. It was kind of cool. It was like the room where I mean, I bought many games at Toys R Us back in the day. I'm trying to remember any that I bought in the room. Not really come to mind right now, but I'm sure I know I had. I mean, many times. But yeah, Toys R Us was definitely a different place back then. It was, it had the '80s kind of look, the color scheme, the wooden kind of outside. And this was one that was near my neighborhood growing up. I grew up in Woket, Connecticut, and I'm sure no one knows where that is, but it was near a city called Waterbury, and that's the one I went to a lot. I'm sure many Toys R Us were like this back in the day, but I that's the one I went to, and but yeah, like it was so different. Like I mean, it was more magical in a way because there was just so much stock, and like so many toys to look at. I mean, in that Toys R Us that I went to, I mean, I was around when as far as I can remember, till about. The thing is, there was a mall, like a small mall nearby, and they were knocking that because they built a bigger mall in that city. And I don't know if that Toys R Us moved there or they just opened a new Toys R Us and got rid of the old one. I don't remember exactly, but the new one obviously had this was like around 97, and they had the new look and everything, and definitely much smaller in size, smaller aisles, not as much stock. That might have to do with, well, I mean, the internet just started then. I don't know how prevalent internet shopping was. I mean, maybe there was a start of it, so less stock, and it just wasn't the same. And had the look that Toys R Us had until probably about the time. Well, now it's gone, at least in the States anyway. But that's what I remember. And but yeah, that one was around until about 97. And then they closed, and they opened the new one, and they had the new. I went there too, obviously, but it just had the new look, the smaller aisles, not as much stock, and had the modern look that they had. But the old one, just something uncanny about it. It was just like you can find probably videos or maybe pictures of people that have pictures of the inside of what an old Toys R Us looked like. And I've seen videos of people talking about how it was different, like the aisles were just, it felt like they went for miles. It really did. Like one aisle each, and it was huge. And you can't, and I've gotten lost in a Toys R Us. I have an interesting story. Actually, this is an interesting story because it was the first time I ever played Sonic the Hedgehog, the first one anyway. Because this was probably back in like '92, I want to say. Yeah, me and my mom were at Toys R Us, and they had kiosks. Obviously, you can play like a lot of different games. They had one for the Sega Genesis, and that's how I got to play Sonic for the first. I think it was the first time I played it. I mean, that was around the time the first game came out. Well, I'm sure the second one was on the way really soon at that point, but at least it was my first encounter with the guy, Sonic, playing Sonic. And they also, interestingly, had a kiosk for TurboGrafx 16, which was a system that failed in America. It was made by NEC, but it was interesting. They had a kiosk for that, and of course for Super Nintendo and NES, because they were still making NES games at that point. It was like 92-ish. Even though it was kind of the end of the life, but that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, I played Sonic. I actually, me and my mom, for some reason, we went to the kiosk, and I saw Sonic. I'm like, okay, because I knew about it. I saw it on commercials, or I might have seen the game, the box of it, and I was like, oh, this looks. And I had the NES at that point only. I didn't have the Genesis. I got it actually after that experience because I really wanted Sonic. And I think a few months ago, actually, after that, maybe it was probably my birthday of '93. Maybe it was more than a few months. Maybe maybe this was like '93, '92. I don't remember for sure. But I got my own Genesis, and but let's go back to the main topic, which is I played Sonic, and my mom for some reason must have went some. And this was Toys R Us back in the early 90s, and it was huge. And I played Sonic. I played through Green Hill Zone, and I was like, yeah, Green Hill Zone, I'm playing Sonic. And then I defeat Dr. Robotnik. That's what he was called back then. Now he's Eggman, obviously, because yeah, well, that's a different thing. But it was really, I beat it the first like Green Hill Zone, I think, or something. I think it was like a demo, or I don't know if you could play the whole game. But I did that, and I looked for my mom, and she was gone, and I was so upset, because it was like, oh my god, where's my mom? I'm lost. And luckily, this nice lady found me. I was like 5, maybe? Yeah, about 5, and I was crying, of course. I was a little kid. It was, because it's a giant store, and I thought I couldn't find my mom. Giant freaking aisles with, like, tons and tons of toys. I thought I was going to be lost there forever. But then a lady came, comfort me, and then my mom was like probably down around the corner somewhere, and I just didn't look because I was a dumb kid, like most of us were. But yeah, that was my first experience with Sonic, and just an interesting story. But I do also what other? I have a few other interesting stories. My sister one time. This is kind of weird and random, but I remember one time, I think this happened, unless it's just my brain, because your memories are never always valid, but I remember she wanted, the Flintstones movie, the live action one that came out like 25 something years ago. I can't believe it's that old. I feel so freaking old. But she wanted a book from the movie, like a picture book, or like not a picture book, but you had reading, but it was for kids. For some reason, she begged my mom for it. I don't know why, but that's what I remember. But it was interesting. She had, unless she was begging for something else, but I remember she wanted the book. So my mom, we all begged for something at one point or another. I begged for stuff at Toys R Us. Maybe not have gotten it, but I know I did beg for something at that Toys R Us, and I'll get into that after. But yeah, she got the book. Actually, this is interesting because what I begged for there was around the time this place was shutting down. Like it was around 97. Like I said, the new one was opening, and yeah, and we went there, and I was interested in these things called Capicella. They were actually from Japan, actually. I think Mitsubishi made them, but a different company, got the license and made them in America. I got into that around that time because I got them for Christmas, and they were like these little like plastic ball things, and they had motors inside. You can build like there were all different things you can build, and it was customizable too. And it had motors, and there's all different like it was from the 80s actually. I can't believe it lasted that. I mean I think around that time is when they were stopped making them. I don't know if they still make them now, but yeah, they had this one kit, this giant, and I was really into them. And I saw this. They had this one kit, and they had like the ones I want. I don't. They had the ones I wanted to build, and I begged my parents that whole day. It felt like a whole. Maybe it wasn't a whole day. We were shopping, and I wanted that thing so badly. And they were like, no, no, I don't remember. They probably just didn't want to buy it because, but then, eventually it was funny. We went shopping at other stores. I was still upset. I was like, I want this, go back. I want to buy this thing. And they caved in and bought it. It's so silly in hindsight, but I was a kid, so, whatever. But I got it, and I don't know if it's still in my house. Maybe they got rid of it, but yeah, that was one other memory I have there at the old Toys R Us right before it shut, not right before, but a few months probably before it shut down and the new one opened. But yeah, old Toys R Us, and they had the big bike set. Well, they always had bikes, but it felt much bigger and like I guess epic in a way. And then they had this one area with all the toy, like, those plastic houses, and I don't think those are kind of a dead thing, at least from my knowledge. There was an area for that, for trampoline. It was huge. Like, everything just felt bigger. Because they had more stock, and I think, the internet, of course, changed all the landscape, and less stock in the store, and they sold stuff on the internet, too, themselves, once they changed the way, the newer stores opened and they changed the way, they looked and everything, like smaller aisles, less stock, which wasn't as, epic or not as magical, I guess you can say. I know it sounds hokey, but yeah, Toys R Us back in the 80s, 90s, and it was something, I miss it in a way. I wish, like, well, now Toys R Us is out of business in the States, but it'd be interesting if someone, well, I don't know if anyone could do this, but like if someone made a replica of an old Toys R Us and had old like toys in there and make it feel like it was back then. But yeah, if you have any memories of classic Toys R Us and anything like that, just share in the comments. Tell me. I like to hear them. And yeah, I guess this is kind of my own little tribute to Toys R Us because, everyone's talked. Well, I mean, that was last year, but I guess, yeah, well, in the States anyway, they're gone. But they're still in Japan, though. They're still here where I live now. I guess they're owned by a different company, and it looks like the way it always has. So, yeah, that's about it. And, yeah, so if you have any of your own memories, just let me know. And see you. So, I am out.